Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I do thank the Minister of Finance for that explanation of the thinking behind this motion. However, I want to state at the outset that the practice of the government of coming to this House with truncated select committee processes is one that we regard with, I guess the best word is suspicion, because frankly it happens too often and it goes against what is good practice in this Parliament. Of course, there will be reasons from time to time why a piece of legislation needs a short select committee turnaround. It may be a matter of particular urgency that's arisen. It may simply be because the issues involved are ones that are completely non-controversial and have no issues that they need to be considered. But actually that situation will be extremely rare, Mr Speaker. And once again, I think we've got a piece of legislation here that's getting a truncated select committee process because the government can't manage its own business. So if we look at some of the dates involved in this situation, so the original finalisation of the text was adopted at the 5th Chief Negotiators meeting on the 22nd of May. New Zealand then finalised its signatory to the agreement on the 29th of June. What was happening after that? Why then did it take until August for the Select Committee to be able to give its report to Parliament? The committee met on the 28th of July and then the 20th of August. Just this constant slippage in the process. So you've got an agreement that's actually signed off in May, that New Zealand signs up to in June, that eventually finds its way to the committee towards the end of July, that emerges out of the committee in August, and gets to the Parliament here in September. At some point, did someone in the government benches go, you know what, we actually need to get a wriggle on here if we're going to get this passed by the end of the year? And the Leader of the House, who the last time we did this, which was only in the last sitting day of Parliament, the Leader of the House's management of the legislative program is hopeless, Mr Speaker. And what happens is that members of Parliament and members of the public are who suffers as a result of that. So I take the point that the Minister has made, that this bill has had a reasonable amount, or the matters covered in this bill have had a reasonable amount of examination by the Foreign Affairs and Trade Committee. But that doesn't reduce the importance of the public seeing this legislation, having the chance to comment on it, and MPs having a chance to consider the full range of issues that will arise. I actually believe that if the Foreign Affairs and Defence Committee were simply given the information that this bill needs to be enacted before the end of the year, it's quite within their power and wit to say, yep, we understand that, it's a pretty good committee, it operates fairly collegially. They would get the bill reported back with plenty of time, but without this arbitrary restriction around it being reported back by the 22nd of October. And so, Mr Speaker, it's with regret that we're not going to be able to support this. It places pressure on all parties in Parliament. The Foreign Affairs and Defence Trade Committee has representatives of smaller parties in this House. They find it very hard to be able to attend select committee meetings when the House is sitting because they don't have the resources. It's even a stretch for other larger parties to have that. It interferes with the business of MPs who perhaps aren't available on Fridays or on other days in which this motion would allow the Select Committee to meet. So it's extremely disappointing from this side of the House. These are serious issues within this bill. We support the New Zealand signatory to this piece of legislation, to the establishment of the bank through this piece of legislation. But nobody, including the Minister of Finance, has stood up here today and said that this is without risk or that this is without issues around governance that need to be clearly sorted through. We need to give the public the opportunity to be a part of that debate. New Zealand is contributing over $100 million to this. This is a new venture in terms of how to fund infrastructure in the Asian region. It goes against what some of our traditional allies would want, so that's a serious matter as well. All of these are matters that deserve full and proper public attention, and I simply don't think it is good enough for the government's disorganisation to be the cause of limited involvement for the public. If there's another good reason, by all means, but that is not what it appears to us on this side of the House. We know that this was in front of the House in June, or could have been in front of the House any time from the end of June onwards, and the failure of the government to get a piece of legislation together in time so that we don't need a truncated select committee process is ridiculous. And I do also just want to finish my comments, Mr. Speaker, by saying I think we need to treat individual committees with some respect. The Foreign Affairs and Defence and Trade Committee would have been capable of making a decision about getting this bill back so that we can sign it up. It's all sealed and delivered before the end of the year, and we will be there when the bank first kicks off its operations. So I'm very disappointed that this motion's found its way to the House. It is unfortunately becoming a pattern from this government to have truncated select committee processes. We don't think that's good enough, and we will oppose measures unless there is a very good reason to support them.